So cool, look, thank you for hand over to James.
Okay, thanks, Aidan. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about single-page applications with Backbone, like Aidan was saying. I'm doing my best to get some kind of a .NET link in here. I'll admit I've only used .NET very little myself. I'm traditionally a Java developer. Then I turned into a JavaScript developer overnight there a couple of years ago. So just a little bit about me. I hope that you see what I can see on my screen here. Yeah. Okay. So I'm lead architect in Karma. We're just based in Penrose Wharf there, and we're a real-time carpooling application. We call ourselves the first social network for carpooling, and in there, I started off working on some Backbone applications, and while I was doing that, I decided that the best way to know the technology intimately was to write a book. So this was released here in December, and the book goes through all of the key points about Backbone, and you know, there's not too much. It's a nice, light JavaScript framework. So to bulk up the book, I put in all the other things that I felt were needed in a JavaScript book that I could have done with when I made the move from Java. So there's stuff about the architecture, the tooling that's available, like Grunt, and the test-driven development, everything. So it's like the complete book for the JavaScript developer. So we'll be giving away one copy for a question during the talk, and a random copy then towards the end. The other thing, just that I'll talk about briefly now, it's a side project that I'm working on called Donate Code. It's something I'd just like to bring up again at the end of tonight's talk. It's unrelated to Backbone, but I think it's something that might interest some of you. So here is my schedule for today. I'm going to first talk about the history of single-page applications, and then talk about the characteristics of single-page applications. Hopefully this stuff isn't too basic for you. If it is, at any point, just start booing and throwing stuff at me. I won't mind. Then we'll go through the advantages and pitfalls of these type of applications. People love to hear pitfalls because, you know, it's not perfect at all. Then, of course, I'm going to turn to Backbone a little and some of the other JavaScript libraries that are available for you all to use. And then we'll talk, I think I've got one slide on single-page applications in .NET. Justifies me being here. So we start with the history. Why did single-page web applications happen at all? And if you cast your mind back to 2005, before then, I suppose it was like the web was a bit murky, and Ajax and RESTful web services kind of hopped onto the scene, and they made all of our web applications much better. Like the example I always think of is before 2005, when I was paying overpriced car insurance. You know, when you go to the insurance websites and you picked your car make, and the whole page went off, refreshed, and then it came back, and then you had to pick your model and back again. You know, all these long loops of reloading. So when Ajax came around and these sites were done a little bit better and there was less refreshing, I thought, this is exciting. It's just because, like, finding insurance is such a laborious process as it is. So then, kind of unrelated to web, then in 2006, when jQuery came along, that kind of standardized a lot of things. Like on web applications now, you had a standardized way of doing manipulation of the DOM and doing your Ajax requests and a pile of other things, animations. So that was brilliant. There was finally a common way of doing things, and at the time you'd think, well, you know, that's the internet fixed. But then 2006 to 2010, I think, were kind of the wilderness years. It was the time as well that I turned my back away from JavaScript. And I thought, there it is, a dead language. But, you know, the web applications were messy. There was just no structure anywhere. People could do stuff with jQuery, and they were putting stuff everywhere, and they were pulling data from REST web services, and there was just no neatness to it. And that was annoying for me at the time as a Java developer, because you come from, first you've got the static programming language, which is brilliant in a way, but also you've got people following patterns, and you've got like a good community of people putting together frameworks like Spring, which had been around for ages and ages. You had .NET, which was a pretty decent way of doing things as well. So in 2010, and since 2010, we've got the standards proliferation, and you know, this XKCD comic that just talks about, you know, there's 14 competing standards, we need another one. All this, you know, there's just all these frameworks started popping up that were dealing with the model view controller problem on the client side. Some of these, Backbone being one of the main ones and one of the oldest ones that are there now, Angular, Knockout, all of these client-side frameworks started popping up, coming to the rescue, and infuriating some people at the same time. So that's just the history of single-page web apps. I think we all like much prefer the web the way it is now, with these, you know, applications where you don't have the big reload cycles. That's the main thing, that you've got little bits of your application refreshing like you did in desktop applications forever. So next, just onto some of the characteristics of a single-page web app. And I think there's three main characteristics. You've got websites that are more app-like. So they're, you know, they are made to be all loaded in one go. And once you've got that first load, everything's there for you. There shouldn't be too much waiting. You shouldn't be seeing too many spinners. And all your resources that you need are loaded at the start. I should put an asterisk next to that, because it's not entirely true. Sometimes you'll just load, you know, the first half of the resources that you need, and you load the rest later as the user is getting closer to the section of the site that requires particular resources. And by resources here, I mean JavaScript, CSS, images, mainly images, or other AJAX resources, something that you're consuming from an external web service. And of course, you know, there's lots of little tricks that you can put around loading resources that you should keep in mind for single-page web apps, like using different content delivery networks so that everything isn't just bottlenecked around one server and things. The other thing is that the entire page never reloads, and sections of the page are reloaded, but you should never really leave the page. And the last thing is that you've bookmarkable sections. So you have a single page, that's got all your information, but how do you give a bookmark to your About section and to your Contact section? So your single page web app will allow you to do this by using those little hash portions of the URL. So for any single page web application, you're going to need to do it properly, you're going to need model view something, so that you can redraw the entire user interface without needing a server round trip. And this example here that I've got, if you can see it, has a page with two views. So just imagine two sections of a page. Each section is represented by a model, and each of those models, which may represent two different things, are connected to a server resource. So they're getting stuff back, two different bits of data from the server. So the data layer becomes really, really important in any single page application. So the, the best examples of single page applications are usually cited to be Gmail and Twitter. So in Twitter I think Twitter just lays things out in a very obvious way. You've got different parts of your screen updating. Different parts of your screen are mapped to different parts of the different server resources. So with the client being so busy, what does the server do in these applications? And there's two main choices. There's the thin server architecture, where your server, if you're writing a new one, you just write it as a pure data API or a web service. And the other, if you're dealing with a legacy server, that might be contentious. It could be troublesome if your server had been doing a lot more of the work before. And in those cases, you probably look at doing a thick stateful server, where the server renders the HTML and executes the logic, records the state, and updates the client. So just back to the thin server. In this case, your client side has most of the logic of the web application, and it means the server has a very specified role, which is neat and nice. But again, you need to be really disciplined on your client side, because all of a sudden it's got to do a lot more. It's got to maintain some idea of state itself if the server isn't doing so. This can lead to some pitfalls, which we'll talk about shortly. In this case, the server is almost doing what it did before, except handing over control to the client just to refresh the page. So the client has a lot less work to do here, and maybe it's an easier transition. Personally, if I was to do it, and I think if anyone was to start an application following these architectures, you'd probably go with the thin server. It just means less server resources. The client does the work.
So the thin one, so there is a role for the server, so isn't it, to do things like search engine, to allow people to crawl your website and indexing and everything?
Yeah, definitely.
So it can't just kind of spit out the HTML or send all the resources to the browser and that's the end of it. So how do you kind of do that with the thin server? Like what's the trick there?
Well, with the thin server, I mean, you're still going to need your HTML pages, your client-side pages hosted. And it'll probably be just one page. It's a good question.
Or is it as simple as that? Is it that it literally just serves out one page and that page can be crawled?
It kind of is, yeah. And then there's some tricks that you put around that page for search engine optimization and things like that.
Yeah.
But I guess so. Yeah. And the server is important for the API side as well, because when you're dealing with something like, say your application connects to Twitter or some other third-party API, you can't have your client secrets in your JavaScript, because that's not going to be obfuscated. Someone will be able to get at your keys. So you do need to kind of have the hop between your own server, especially when you're going for a third party. So it kind of depends on your application, but yeah, most of the time you'll just be serving that single page. Yeah. So then some of the advantages and the pitfalls. I'll look at the sunny side first. So the advantages. The first is that you've got some real parallel development. You can break up your development team if you've the luxury of having more than one person into the guys that deal with the server side, and in the case of the thin server, that's nice. They've got a really testable server. They don't need to worry about the difficulties of test-driven development for web applications. And then you've got the idea that they can provide a mock layer while they're working on the real implementation of the REST API, they can just create some mock that'll allow the front-end developers to just connect in and get some data back, and just for them to continue working. So you do have definitely some parallel development. A nice contract as well. I find like a REST API is kind of the nicest contract to have, and it does lead to a really clean design. The other advantage, obviously, which I've talked about already, is that natural user flow. The application just acts as you expect, and I think we all have high standards of web applications now. We get annoyed when, you know, the whole page refreshes, or I do. So you've got little bits of your application updating when they should, combo boxes filling based on some other information that you put in. The experience on mobile devices, of course, is pretty good. Now, that's not all to do with single-page applications. It's a lot to do with responsive design as well. But you've got everything loaded at once. So then if you go offline, so that offline experience being possible, if you can go offline and you can still have most of your application ready for use. The offline thing is interesting. There's a few technologies in HTML5 that make it available. So you've got your document storage, so you can use just the local storage on the browser, and you've also got the app cache concept, where you can cache resources onto the client on demand and selectively using a manifest. And then using Backbone, for example, there's a couple of plugins that allow you to go offline, do your data, still have your model acting as if it's online, and then once you have connectivity again, it just fires everything back up to the server. Of course, it's not as simple as that. I've never actually seen it work very well, but there's the theory. The other thing is that the state is handled on the client, so it's just less work, less resources for your server, and you don't need to worry about session management anymore with your thin server. So that's the advantages. Then you've got some pitfalls. So one pitfall, I don't know if it's much of a pitfall really, is that JavaScript has to be enabled in the client's browsers. Now, I don't know. I think, as far as I'm concerned, everyone has JavaScript enabled. I don't think, is there anyone here that doesn't? Just out of curiosity. Okay, yeah, fair point. And yeah, that actually can be a bit of a problem. But yeah, so it is a genuine pitfall. The other thing is search engine optimization. So you've got to put a little bit of work into all those bookmarkable sections that you've got, that you need to add some metadata so that when Google is crawling, and Google does pick up these fragments of your page, you need to just do a little bit of extra work. The loading time, though, is probably the biggest pitfall. So the greatest thing is that everything's loaded in your page. The worst thing is everything's loaded in your page. Because you've just got to be, like I was saying earlier, you have to kind of be clever about your loading strategy. There's a pile of things, a pile of tips out there on the internet about how to do this. There's some nice strategies like load your CSS in the header or the head of your page, and load the JavaScript at the end, and then using things like require.js and Backbone, you can be even more clever about what technologies you're loading, or what resources you're loading, sorry. Then the other thing is JavaScript memory leaks. And you know, front-end developers, I'm one of them, will deny existence of all memory leaks in the JavaScript, and it's something to do with your machine, and it's fine on my machine, and all this. But it does happen. And the thing you have to remember is that you're dealing with a completely different type of JavaScript here in a single-page application than you are in a multi-page. All your JavaScript is going to be there. Everything's loaded, and your JavaScript's alive for as long as your site is alive. So when you close a view, you need to make sure that you dispose of all all the stuff that was hanging on to that. And that includes any collections or models or REST resources that you've consumed. Same with, memory leaks will happen as well. If the JavaScript's been responsible for loading images, it's got to unload them. So one,
sorry.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, what about security? Because I mean, you've just written this absolutely fantastic algorithm, and now you stop doing on the server, you're doing it down on the client. What about ways of obfuscating that algorithm, or those lovely dynamic variables where people put in their username and password, and with a good few browser tools you can find them.
Yeah.
Is there any way around that problem?
Well, for the algorithm problem, I would say if there's anything that's at all that's any bit sensitive, that should always be put to the server. So I just put it behind an API, and hopefully it'll be okay. For the other thing, I don't know. I've never wrongly I've never really concerned myself too much with that side, with client side security, but I guess there's strategies. Does anyone know of any way? Yeah?
So away from their browser.
I guess you could do the minification thing or compression, and that helps a little bit. But hackers be hackers. They'll find their way in always. I would say.
You shouldn't really have any sort of safety, I think.
Yeah.
Like I guess what I'm saying is I'm happy with the safety of the client side.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the best ways of obfuscation, if you don't want to use the compression, is just to have a series of like 4 JavaScript developers working, one after the other, and it's obfuscated. And yeah, it can never be fixed. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, it's a very good question though. I reckon if someone does properly crack the security thing on the client side, if it hasn't been done already, that person could be.
There's probably a bit more problems.
Yeah, and it's very easy. You just record your network requests in Chrome or your browser, and you can just watch everything happening. So yeah, you've definitely got to be careful. But I've yet to meet someone who, a server kind of developer who isn't really concerned and really careful about these kind of things, which is why I'm so carefree about it. Like, someone else is worrying about it. So
you should put that into your slide actually as a note on the thin server side of things. With all the advantages of it, there is that added kind of requirement to pay attention to security on all your endpoints.
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
You're not letting people know about that.
Yeah. I tend to look on the bright side of things. So, so just onto the load time issue, which is something that a lot of people run into, especially for the larger scale applications. The thing to do is to use the server. It's there. Don't let it just be too passive about the whole thing. Give it stuff to do. And for the initial load time, there's 2 things: that you can render that first HTML page completely on the server. So you can have it responsible for everything, for filling in the data, and then just from there on in, everything happens on the client. So it can populate the initial models or collections. So all that data is loaded from the server, kind of old style. It's a very, very good compromise, and it's something that I think Airbnb are the ones who do it. They've got Backbone on the client side and Backbone on the server side using Node.js. And they're able to share the models, so it's the same model on both sides, but they do all the initial hard work on the Node.js server and then the rest on the client. It's very neat. It's a great way of doing things. So now on to Backbone.js and other libraries. So there's about 6, is that 6? Sorry, there's about 5 main JavaScript frameworks that are out there at the moment. There's Backbone, which is great, and there's Knockout, Angular, Meteor, and Ember. and loads more. Like you can't move these days around the internet without bumping into another JavaScript framework. But these ones are particularly good. And the thing is that Backbone does its job really well, and I'll be going through that in a bit more detail. If it's boring, really, just let me know and I'll fly through it. The other libraries, almost every other one of these libraries does a thing called two-way data binding. And just to make you aware of what that is before I go into Backbone, it means that you decide that you've got a view and that's paired with a data model, and that view will, anytime that anything changes in the model, the view gets updated. It's really cool. Really, really nice way of developing. But for some reason that I can't explain too well, I don't really like doing things that way. I find it's one of these 80% things. You know, when you get 80% of your application done and everything's brilliant and everything's working great, and then you've got that 20% left to go before you get to production. And that 20% of work takes all the time. It's the uncomfortableness of not knowing too much about what's going on in that two-way data binding that I don't like. I just like to have full control and see all the way through. Because Backbone, you've got to wire up your model to your view manually. And it's just something I prefer, but everyone's different. And I'm probably being too biased to two-way data binding. I just like to kick it around when I can. So.
Can you give an example of where two-way data binding kind of gets in your way? Where you're kind of trying to undo the effects of it?
Yeah.
I can't think really, because sometimes if you're just dealing with a model of itself, right?
Yeah, I guess I suppose it isn't so much that it gets in the way, it's just, it feels a bit like magic to me. Yeah. And just being, you know, it's probably my Java background and my untrusting nature. But, you know, I just...
Does it stem from Hibernate?
Sorry?
Does it stem from Hibernate?
It probably does. I didn't use that too much, but you're right. Like Hibernate and Spring and all those. Sorry?
We'll have to get you like an analyst couch.
Yeah, something happened in those 10 years of Java that messed me up a bit. But I can't, you know, I haven't seen it happen. And in fairness, I'll admit that's because I haven't used these libraries too much. And no doubt next year when I've written a book about Angular, I'll be saying two-way data binding is great. But yeah. So onto Backbone. What it does is it helps structure your code into a model view controller. And it's pretty lightweight. On its own, in its compressed format, it's 6.4 kilobytes. And that matters when you're dealing with loading resources. All of a sudden, when you're working in single-page applications, you get concerned about those download sizes that you see on GitHub or on the project pages. The reasons I like it are that it's mature, it's been around for a long time, everything's ironed out, and it's unopinionated in that, you know, it doesn't tell you how to bind everything. It just lets you only use the view if you only want to use the view, and like use the model as you see fit instead of the prescribed nature of the rest of the frameworks. Now, the thing is, it's 6.4 kilobytes, but you've got to read the small print. It's got some dependencies. It depends on underscore, which is a templating library, which allows you to create, you know, little HTML snippets that have little variables in them and can be populated by a JSON object. And underscore also gives you loads of JavaScript utilities, like quick ways of looping through your collections and your arrays, sorting, filtering. And it also depends on jQuery or another DOM manipulation type library called Zepto, which I've never used. Maybe everyone else has used it, but again, I've never used it, so I just always go with jQuery. Stick with what?
Zepto is basically jQuery with no support for IE Microsoft products.
Okay.
That's the easiest way to do it.
Okay, that's a fantastic description of it, actually. Okay, cool. And then you've got the optional dependency of any templating library. Again, this is where the unopinionated nature becomes really useful. Handlebars being the example, the main example one, the one that I always tend to use in my applications. So I'll go through each of the parts really quickly. So the model represents your single data object, and that's your tweet we'll use as the example. That single object on the server, and it can connect to a server URL to populate and persist. And anytime that the data changes, you can have an event fire, and that's then when you hook in a view to update. So all you do to create a model is that you do this format of defining it, saying your object type is equal to an extension of the backbone type, in this case model, so backbone.model.extend. And I'll share these slides, it's probably difficult to read here. You do things like specify the URL that you're pointing at, adding in extra functions that you want, providing something like a constructor. So it's nice, you're talking about really comfortable JavaScript here. It's like dealing with a real object, an object in a real programming language. And then using it, you just create your object. The setting of variables can be it's a bit verbose. You do your object.set, the name of the variable you want to set, and then the value. So a bit awkward, but for the most part, it's easy enough. And then
what's the idea behind that? Like, why do you call .set and .get? Why can't you just access? Is there something else that happens? Sellers and gatherers?
I think it's just so that the events fire, so that you go through a particular way in order for the change events and anything else to fire. So that's probably the reason. Okay. You can turn it into a JSON object and access variables directly, but changing them directly then would be messy. It'd actually involve a kind of a serialization loop, I think. Yeah, so awkward, but not out of the way. And you actually get really used to this this format. It's weird. And then you try to write in a different language. And
They're going to introduce getters and setters, aren't they?
Oh, are they? Oh.
Yeah, in the future.
Okay.
I think they're speccing it.
Cool.
For future versions. Yeah, getters and setters.
Cool. Of Backbone or of JavaScript?
For JavaScript. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Partly, yeah.
I should really pay more attention to these things.
The observable objects in Harmony or ES6, the one that
Yeah.
just automatically fire events and then you just observe the object itself.
Okay. For the events, then, so most of any of the events actually in Backbone follow this format of event type : and then what's changed. In this case, I have a variable called text. So change : text means that the function specified afterwards will get fired when the text has been changed. So that's a model. Most of the time, you actually keep your models really simple, and you just almost say, tweet extends a model, and then you actually use a collection, because most of the time, you want to deal with a list of data objects. So the collection is used for these bulk operations in your models, and it's almost exactly the same. When data changes, the events fire. You've got your URL that you point to. This time you point it to a list of items, and there's lots of functions that allow you to query and filter based on underscore. So again, it's just saying backbone.collection.extend to create it. And when you define your collection, you actually say, here's the model that this collection is going to contain. And again, you've got your constructor. And there's not much else to say about collections. You can put in functions that'll parse when it comes back. So if you've got, this should never happen, but it does happen, where you've got data in your REST API, and you thought you had a contract with your server developers, but either the front end messed up or the server messed up, and you need to transform the data around a little bit. Or you might, so that's one case, and you put it through the parse function and you can clean up your data. The other case, which is kind of useful, is where you've got, say, we take the tweets example, you've got a timestamp that comes back from the server, but it's not up to the server to say that tweet was 10 minutes ago. You've got to work it out. So you can actually add extra data into your model objects by using a library to work out how long ago that tweet was based on the client-side timestamp. So it's pretty useful, and you'd be surprised how many times you end up using parse for the good reasons. Then the Backbone view is an object that represents the piece of HTML that you want to update. So this piece of HTML that I'm pointing at here is just a div called timeline. What have I done here? Okay, I'll come back to that slide in a second. So you can handle events on your DOM. So you can put in that when a click event happens on a particular element, that a function gets invoked or something else gets updated. And again, it's useful to subscribe to change events in your data layer. So when the tweet collection gets updated, then you've got to increase the timeline or put up that thing saying there's 3 extra tweets. And then you use templates for efficient rendering. So I talked here about this element. So this element here, this div, is what the view object is going to deal with, just the timeline. But you'll want to create a template so that this is going to be probably difficult to see. For each tweet in your list, in your collection, you want to just put in an LI, a list item, and list out the information. So this is a handlebars template that allows you to do that kind of thing. So creating the view is backbone.view.extend again. And then you point to the element, you give it a template, and in your initialize, you actually go and you retrieve your collection. So the view is actually one of the controllers in the Backbone world. That it is? Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Where's the controller? You mean controller?
Yeah, it's just so vague about it, and when I was writing the book, I was trying to come up with, is there just one definitive person who says this? No. It kind of went between. I think I've actually got a definition here. I'll be as surprised as you when I see it, because I can't remember. But I would say you share the controller between your view object and your router. I'll talk about the router in a second. But yeah, it's a very unsatisfactory answer. The render function in your view is what actually appends stuff to your DOM. So you'll take your data from your collection and you'll pass it through into your template. And once that element is created, kind of off screen, you just append it onto your div, and you're done. So that's the Backbone view. The last thing, the router, kind of controller, it does handle the application state. So in a single page application, what needs to be controlled? One of the things is the bookmarks. And because of that, you might say that the Backbone router is your controller. So for every single hash that you've got on your page, so your hash being like, a little anchor, you want to say, run this function or show this view or change this view when I hit this part. And the router is where all of these functions are mapped. There's got to be an equivalent in .NET to routers. I know there is in Rails. It's like they're all about the routers. I'm guessing there's some kind of object or some some concept that maps to it.
There is routing, I call it routing.
Oh, sorry.
Routing or routing, but based on like your, the action and the URL, it'll point you to the right,
Okay.
the right controller.
Cool.
The right action and controller.
Interesting. Yeah. Points you to the right controller. So that brings you back to the view. Yeah. The whole controller thing.
To go back to something that you mentioned there.
Oh yeah.
Models,
Sorry.
right, and parsing models. So you're kind of moving some logic into the model object itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should that not be abstracted out to a controller in the same way that maybe related stuff from the view should be abstracted into a controller, even though there doesn't appear to be even a conceptual model of a controller in Backbone?
Yeah.
I want to kick somebody for calling it an MVC framework because
Yeah.
I went nuts trying to figure out what I couldn't figure out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Because to me, like it's always demonstrated, even you're demonstrating it, there's the model and the view. But for me, logically, I'd rather somebody explain to me the controller first and then how you tie it together.
Yeah.
Because without that, that's where all of this can start turning into spaghetti head as well.
It can, definitely. If you look on my, well, you've obviously written your own Backbone applications.
I'm trying to.
If you look at my GitHub, I've got a GitHub account set, or GitHub project set up with all the source from the book. I did try to create this single app JavaScript that managed everything. So it knew about all the models and the views, the routers, or the router, sorry, single, and it sets off the history. So there is that one single entry point that could be considered a controller as well, but that's always handwritten JavaScript, and it's kind of the glue that ties everything together. But you'll always have that. You'll have noticed anyway when you're writing your own Backbone application that bit that you were writing that instantiates that first view or that first model or collection is probably a controller to you in some ways.
Had me hella confused.
Yeah. There's actually something I'll mention in a few slides' time that helps a lot with this thing. I forgot I had it in the presentation. So, but it won't solve everything. So just the router here, you set up your routes, and you can listen to things happening in the model. So in this example here, which you can look at later, I've got a search model that it's just a data object that's in the application, and if the query attribute changes there, then I force the application to navigate to the search. The query will change if someone types in something into the view part. It's just one example of how everything ties together. So I think it might be better if I just skip this slide, which talks about model view controller. It's the router knows about the models, knows about the collection, the model, and the view. And it depends on just how you look at that pattern at all. The MVC, or MV star as they call it now, pattern. Unopinionated means that I've got lots of control. I can see everything that's going on. I can easily debug through something that's happening, and I can watch my data come in from the model. So I can, if I'm looking in Chrome, I'm looking in the network tab. I see the data coming into the model through the REST API. Then I can go to my model object. I can see something changing, and then I can go to my view. I can see the change event being triggered, and then I know that it's going to go to whatever rendering function. It's probably a bit like old-fashioned of me, but as I said before, it's what I like.
You used a very opinionated operator in that.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I actually didn't realize that. The other thing that's great about Backbone, probably, and I think this is where it has an edge over the other frameworks. Someone will throw something at me here. Is the ecosystem and the amount of plugins and projects that have been built around Backbone. It's been around a long time, and the guy who invented it, Jeremy Ashkenazi, I think, He's the guy who invented CoffeeScript. People love CoffeeScript. It scares me. Again, the control thing. But so he's a well-respected guy in the JavaScript world. So it seemed like he got a big community behind him really early on. People building plugins and building plugins to allow the kind of the two-way data binding. You can get a plugin for that, and you've got things that'll help you do that offline syncing. All those kind of cool things that people like to have in their applications. There's the two screenshots here I've got are Thorax and Marionette. And they're two, Marionette being the main one, two frameworks that are built on top of Backbone. And what they give you is, first, two-way data binding if you so choose. And second, as far as I remember, Marionette has a controller in there. Kinda? No? Okay. For the controller fanatics, it's not enough. But yeah, I mean, they help a bit. Again, what's nice about these two frameworks, well, sorry, the Marionette framework, is that you can just use bits of it. So if you've written your Backbone application and you find that you've got too many sub-views and you're getting memory leaks in your application, then you can start bringing in the Marionette views. And if only to handle the disposal of a view, disposing all the JavaScript objects around it. So it's pretty cool. And then the other thing is the maturity. So, you know, lots of big names are using it, so it can't be bad. There's some pretty good tooling as well if you're using Yeoman or Grunt. So you use Grunt for just, you know, Grunt is like Ant or I don't know. It's any of those command line utility frameworks. So anything you want to do, like compression or running your tests or reloading your browser or anything that might involve manual intervention apart from writing your code, Grunt will look after. So it runs all these tasks. It's very nice. And the other thing is Yeoman. So Yeoman gives you generators so that you can say, I want to create a Backbone application, and it does all the boilerplate for you, because there is a lot of boilerplate to Backbone applications. And then you can say, I want to create a view, and it creates the view. So it does a lot of the basics around your application. So, obligatory .NET slide. There's templates available. I was actually kind of surprised by it. I'm sorry, it's been a long time since I've looked at .NET. But there's templates available for you to use Knockout or Backbone applications if you've got ASP WebTools 2012.2 update. So ever since then, I guess, you can do you can create Backbone applications. And I took a skim through the templates. They looked pretty good, and for all I know about ASP.NET, it did seem that it would get you started very quickly. So it's nice. Things like that that help you along are pretty cool. So, sorry about all the Backbone talk. So just to finish up, well, any questions that you can ask later, but just three things. One thing is that if there's any JavaScript developers here, or mobile developers, Karma are hiring at the moment, so let me know and we can talk about it. The Backbone book, it's available on Amazon, and obviously we'll be giving away a couple of copies there in a minute. And this donate code thing that I was talking about at the start, the idea of it is that okay, I'll start at the start. How it came about was about a year ago, this charity asked me to write this application for them. And instead of charging them, they were just asking for a quote. Instead of charging them, I decided I'd do it for free. And so I built the app for them, and I just said, that money that you were going to give to me, just use that in the charity. So we did that, and we released the app, and they get all the app proceeds. The thing is, it felt very good. So I started up this thing now called Donate Code. And the idea is that charities and schools and community groups, they list their projects up on this site, and developers can just donate their time. Developers, designers, and anyone who wants to help them with social media or IT setup, just volunteers their time. And the idea is that eventually it'll become some kind of a matching service for these projects that need people to help out. It's something that I'm starting it up. It's just an idea, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, and looking after your soul, I'd appreciate people signing up, but you don't have to, and don't feel under any obligation. Oh, thank you, thanks. So that's it. Has anyone any questions? This is the awkward part. I have no planted questions. I should have thought of that.